The left hand often takes up more rehearsal time than the right hand. Is this ideal? We have to have the right notes. We have to have good intonation. We also have plenty of other things to work on, particularly in a complex work like Enchanten. In this video, I hope to come up with a plan that addresses left-hand technique so that we can learn the notes quickly and spend more time in other areas. Welcome to Teaching Orchestra. With Enchanten, we're probably going to spend more time with the bow than with the left hand, but orchestra is a bimanual activity. Two hands are doing two completely different tasks, so the left hand can be a drain on the right hand and vice versa. So why not do it like your old piano teacher did? Practice hands separately, because something needs to sustain the sound so that our students can make adjustments when it comes to things like pitch. Enchanten has a lot of half position, has a lot of open patterns, has a lot of augmented patterns, has a lot of minor patterns, but no major patterns anywhere in Enchanten. The best way to learn these patterns across your orchestra is like the process for tuning open strings. It uses the same fundamentals. Long bows, minimize bow changes, don't play louder than your stand partner, and play with your best tone. In the Teaching Companion, available on teachingorchestra.com, I expose the students to finger patterns from the very beginning using the process that I just described. We start off with the minor pattern, and we hold each note out, which gives the students a chance to adjust. Don't move on to the next note until that note is perfectly in tune and up to your standard. In other method books, they do this in different ways, like they use 4 quarter notes instead of a sustained note, like 4 notes per bow or 1/8 notes all in the same direction, and that works okay for beginners who haven't learned how to use full bow strokes yet. But for beginners, they're probably not going to be performing Enchanten, so for your more intermediate students that can handle these fermatas, we want to do that because it minimizes the bow changes and it allows every student to be able to hear and blend and tune to each other. After this minor pattern, we've got the open pattern right here. They can get really good at that. It includes the E flat on the D string. And then we also have an augmented pattern in half position, which includes the B flat here and then the half step here from D to E flat. So looking at these patterns, which notes are probably the most likely to be out of tune? The B flat's on the A string, right? The E flat's on the D string. The 4th finger notes with the upper strings, and perhaps the D on the A string and the G on the D string. Students need to get a feel for where to put their thumbs in half position, and they need to be able to go from half to first position fluidly. Students also need to be able to audiate or to internalize the pitches, which isn't what I would love to see a brain scan to confirm this. But if we did like a QEEG or like a brain scan on someone who's audiating pitches on an open pattern, I'd bet that what we would see is a lot of activity in the hippocampus. And what does the hippocampus do? It's like the hippo in the campus. That's what I learned in my undergraduate psychology class. The hippocampus is in charge of memory. So if you need to remember what an in-tune open pattern sounds like, you first have to experience it. You have to have at least once in your life heard an in-tune open pattern so that you have something to remember in the first place, right? And the problem is that if we don't hold our students accountable and they never get to experience an in-tune open pattern in their orchestra classes and have no frame of reference, where are they drawing from? And maybe the orchestra teacher in the classroom hasn't heard an in-tune open pattern in several years and has trouble remembering what an in-tune open pattern sounds like. And this phenomenon that I'm describing is why lots of orchestras play out of tune. In my classroom, I have to find a way to simplify so the students learn it correctly and they repeat their success consistently. The finger patterns in the teaching companion, they're a tried and true strategy that I've used for a very long time. And I'll probably also combine it with my Skittles exercise. And you can watch a video of me teaching this in season 5, episode 8. And I go over in detail how we practice string crossings with the left hand. And I'll tell you why the exercise is called Skittles. I'm not going to spoil it here though, so you got to go watch it. But there's a lot of ways to do the Skittles exercise. But for this way to make Enchanten better, what I would do is I would do Skittles with a minor pattern on the G string, open pattern in half position on the D string, and an augmented pattern on the A string, just like in the teaching companion, but using the Skittles technique. Okay, this will cover the 3 different patterns used on 3 different strings, and it'll get them to be able to go from string to string, going from first position to half position, then back as it applies. When the students get really good at these patterns and they need more of a challenge, try taking the rhythm exercises 1, 2, and 3 from the teaching companions and adding finger patterns to them. Can they play in tune? Can they keep the volume consistent with the asymmetrical bowings? Here in rhythm 1, we can, instead of using the open Ds, what we can do is we can go open D, repeat, E flat, repeat, F, repeat, G, repeat, A, and maybe descend as well. We can do this on other strings too. Can we keep the same volume and play in tune? If the students can do that, keep the same volume and play in tune, they're demonstrating success. Now we can learn some of the left-hand patterns that come up frequently in Enchanten, and it'll help your students learn it faster so that we can get to other technique that's more musical. So the teaching companion starts with quarter notes, but you may want to slow the tempo down pretty slow. And I know this seems counterintuitive, but most of the time, if you go slower, your students will learn it faster. So let's look at the left-hand pattern number 1. We start with the quarter notes here, and they just learn how to play and repeat the pattern, and you just cycle it over and over again. And on your metronome, you just bump up the tempo as they play it through, get it to go faster and faster. Then eventually they'll be able to do the 8th notes, maybe not at tempo first, but you can slow it down and try it again, and then they'll have the technique. Left-hand pattern number 2 is similar. We get the addition of this E flat here, which is going to be challenging. Make sure that we get it slow and in tune before moving on to the 8th notes. This pattern corresponds to this technique here and this technique here, which will make them learn this much faster. Violins and violas get the same thing in measure 51, 52, and 53, so it will help them out as well. And it focuses on the string crossings, and it really gets them to isolate their technique in these places. And the bass players get it here at 55, 56, 57. By learning it this way in the teaching companion, homogeneously, we're saving a lot of time. And I'm all about saving time so that we can develop our musicianship and spend as little time with the left hand as possible. Let's check out patterns 5 and 6. That's where we do the 3rd position work. Pattern 5 focuses on the 3rd position work that we see in first violins, and I also give it to the violas in the 2nd violin, so they can learn the technique too. In number 6, we learn it 2nd position with the cello part, and I give it to the bass players too, so they can learn how to shift. I'm all about giving challenges to my bass players and really to all my students, making sure that everybody gets the same technique so that everybody learns and grows. Think about your 2nd violinists that aren't quite confident enough to play first violin yet. You can really run the risk of them always being a 2nd violin, really being pigeonholed into that section if they don't get challenged too. So these exercises go over these patterns to get your students to evolve, get them out of their comfort zones, and get them to work just like everybody else. If you think about your bass players, they often get left out. If you're starting with like 5 to 10 beginning bass players, but for some reason you only have 2 or 3 in your entire high school program, there's a good chance that they're washing out because they're not being challenged. And a lot of the early beginner music and grade 1, grade 2 stuff doesn't really challenge the basses very much, and sometimes it just doubles the cellos. And would you want to play in an orchestra like that where your part doesn't matter? Not me. So I like to make sure that my bass players are included when we do these technique exercises in the teaching companions, and I make my bass players work, and it's good for them. Enchanten gives bass players an independent part. They don't always double the cellos. In fact, they rarely double the cellos, and I think that's important too. It's music that really makes them be independent and work and really develop and love their sound for the bass. So those are my strategies for the left hand technique. My goal is to spend as little time as possible on the left hand, and I hope that these methods will get them to learn their parts accurately and in tune and quickly so that we can work on our musical expression. In my next video, I'm going to go over tricky spots, and I hope to see you then.